Garry Pritchard from Emil Ford Lawyers. I've been admitted for 47 years and therefore a member of the Law Society for 47 years. I currently practice, I'm an accredited property specialist. I currently practice in property, commercial, general commercial and estate planning. So my areas of expertise have sort of narrowed down a bit because of the nature of practice these days. The reason why I'm here, I guess, is because our firm has developed a product called Paradox. Now, how that happened was that from about 2005, because I'm interested in technology and in practice development and the way practices work, I started going to the Land Titles Office, as it then was, where they were starting to talk about e-conveyancing. And so I go right back to the very early days of e-conveyancing, what's now become PEXA. And I kept saying, what about up to exchange? And they all said, nobody's interested in anything after exchange. So I said, well, nobody's doing anything up to exchange. So we then developed a product called Paradox, which assembles the contract for sale online. It's independent of any practice management system or any broker. And so we rolled that out in 2012. And even now, I don't think there's any other product that matches it, although InfoTrack is trying very hard to catch up. The great difficulty that we've had in marketing that to lawyers is that I speak to a lot of lawyers about it, and I've spoken at a few conferences, and the biggest inhibitors to take up of technology are generally, as far as we can tell, someone in the firm who inhibits any kind of development. So the experience I've had is you've got people who say the senior partner has to approve everything, and the senior partner is often too busy to look at anything, and so nothing happens. And there's one fellow who was telling me that about the senior partner, and then they started using it. And I said, what happened? He said, oh, we just ignored the senior partner and started doing it. There was another firm where the CFO of a fairly large firm said to me that actually the property partner was very enthusiastic. The CFO said, look, for the cost of using Paradox, we could develop our own program, our own product. And from contracts that I've seen from that firm since, I don't think that they have. There are other people that say, yes, well, we've all got to agree on this, and the IT section really is the one that drives any sort of innovation. And so if you've got people in the IT section who are busy doing other things or don't care, then it stumbles there. And the maybe even the greatest inhibitor is when somebody says to me, my secretary says we don't need that. And I often say to people, who runs your practice? Who decides how much money you make in your practice? And in many practices, it's the secretary. One of the early firms that took up Paradox, I'd known this fellow for years, the light suddenly came on when he realised how it would help his practice, and so he was a great user of it. Then all of a sudden they stopped after a couple of years. And so I said to him, why was that? In an email. And he emailed back to say, oh, I didn't realise we weren't using it. He said, but I've spoken to my paralegal and she said that agents didn't like it, or they couldn't do this or couldn't do that, and so she started using something else. So those are the inhibitors in the smaller law firms to taking up technology, and it really is an interesting question as to how you can manage change in a law firm to make that happen. It seems to me that if the whole firm is taking on a big project, then people get behind it. So we moved recently from one accounts package to a practice management system. And everyone in the office, from secretaries up or from partners down, whichever way you want to look at it, embraced it, looked forward to the change and made it happen. So if you put on or have a big project to take on particular technology, then that seems to work. But if you read all the material on change management, it's all over the place as to how organisations can effect change to the mindset of its employees in the business that they work in.
The practice management system, How has that affected the way in which you deliver services to clients, the way in which your business operates?
Well, we only put it together because we saw a need to make our practice work better. So when it first came in, people were still using the paper contract for sale, and I remember a conversation I had with the Law Society where I said, every firm has single-sided white copies of the contract for sale. So if somebody sends you a contract in paper form, which is the worst way to get it, you really want it in electronic form. So we had to pull the contract apart, slot our 12, 13 pages into the rest of the contract, run it through the photocopier, then pull it out and put the blue pages back together. And someone from the Law Society said to me, but you can't do that. You know that that's breach of copyright to do that. And I said, you must understand what actually happens out there in every law firm. And I've spoken to other law firms since, so of course, that's the only way to do it. So the quite backward approach that the Law Society Real Estate Institute has taken towards delivering the contract for sale has inhibited a lot of firms taking up technology. And we still get some contracts in paper form, and I just don't understand what's happening. I spoke to a conveyancer the other day and I said, what's happening with the 2016 contract? He said, well, I realised that I bought pads and pads and pads of blue paper. He said, so I've got to, he actually used the word recycle, and I'm trying to work out what he means by recycling. There's another firm that I spoke to where the fellow said, what are you talking about? He said, we just copy the contract. We haven't paid for the contract for years. And so in terms of how it's affected our practice, it's certainly made our practice a whole lot smoother. When an agent sends us, agents are into faxes. I don't know why they don't send emails. They send faxes saying we've got a buyer. We can get a contract out to the other lawyer in 7 minutes, because my secretary used to proudly time herself on how quickly we could have the contract in the hands of the other lawyer electronically, not as 4 PDFs. So if you look at some of the properties at Pyrmont, you still have people attaching 4 PDFs because they've had to split the contract down because of the file size. We just send a link and people access the link and download it. So it's made our conveyancing practice, our property practice, far more efficient. And certainly when it comes to subdivisions, you can just churn them out one after another. So it certainly has improved our firm in those terms.
You've been in practice a long time. You've seen an enormous number of changes in that period.
Indeed, I have.
Where do you see the future of legal services in the profession in, say, 5 or 10 years' time?
That's a very good question, and I don't know. When I first started in practice, there was a range of law firms from the big ones. I remember when Clayton Utz was in Liverpool Street and had 20 practitioners or something like that, and they've changed considerably. So in those days you had everything from the big firms down to the small sole practitioners. These days you basically have 2 silos. You have the big firms and you have the sole practitioners. I think the big firms tend to look after themselves, although I've seen some of the big firms perform, I don't say appallingly, but they just, when big firms get into cookie cutter law, it really becomes very embarrassing, and quite often I apologise to my clients for the way that the other firm has performed. When it comes to the small practitioners, either the Law Society has to decide whether it will get into the market of looking after small practitioners or not. But I find that what drives up costs quite often in property matters is the incompetence of lawyers on the other side. And quite frankly, I had an email on Saturday night at 9 o'clock, and I tend to look at them at that time of the night, from a person on the other side in a matter. And I was going to email back straight away and say, what have you been drinking? But it was just gobbledygook, and I showed it to other people in our office and said, what on earth could this mean? We're up against that kind of thing. So our costs these days at the lower level of transactions are increased by the poor performance of other lawyers and their lack of knowledge in the way that they run their matters.
Any questions?
I do. So in your time, have you noticed client expectations change as a result of the efficiencies that you have been talking about? Or
yes, a classic example was with the 5 1/4 inch floppy disk. When clients used to ring us and say, have you got my title deed? We'd say, I'll have a look and get back to you in a few days. And so then somebody would go and look through all the cards and the books and work out that we had the title deed, and then we'd ring them back in a couple of days and say, yes, we've got it. And so they'd say, thank you, that's fantastic. We had a secretary go through all the books and put them onto a 5¼ floppy. And so we then were able to say to a client, oh, we'll let you know in an hour. And it was a very, very short time before clients just expected you to have the information at your fingertips. So practice has got to the point where we invested a lot of money. We paid $5,000 for our first IBM computer, and the secretaries used to share time on it. Now, the young lawyers these days can't quite understand what that's about. You know, we were paying for that technology, and the clients very quickly just assumed that technology was at our fingertips. Because we could do things quickly, they didn't have to pay so much. And so client expectations these days at the lower level, you don't pay very much. And generally, we get quite a few phone calls where somebody rings up and says, the first thing they say is, how much do you charge for? And as politely as I can, I say to them, we're not the firm for you. You know, if dollars are the most important thing to you, then you don't need us. However, in the general property transactional area, if you took out of it the lawyers who don't quite know what they're doing, it really is a very, very simple process these days. You don't, you know, if contracts are prepared properly, you don't need to spend hours negotiating out silly clauses. And it's something that will very, very quickly become you know, a hit the button thing. And in fact, you know, agents will be able to prepare contracts themselves very quickly by hitting a button. And where does that leave lawyers? If agents are able to do that, they can't charge for it, but if they can do it. So there have been a lot of changes, and in terms of costs, clients just assume that because you've got computers at your fingertips, you can give them an answer very quickly, and that they don't have to charge for or don't have to pay for.
Any other questions? Ben?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, I mean, your firm's been quite proactive in developing an application to put to the market, and you've mentioned your frustrations in dealing with some of the law firms in relation to that. Do you feel that, and I asked this question to Philip before, but is your perception in dealing with, because you are dealing with a lot of smaller firms, that there is an aversion to technology generally, or, and if so, what role do you think the society, or you know, how does the profession move beyond that?
I haven't detected an aversion to technology, but I mean, a lot of people use Leap, and we can always tell when somebody uses Leap who's on the other side, because you get an email that says, please see the attached letter. And the letter would be very carefully constructed. It will say, yes, we agree to settlement on Thursday at 2 o'clock. So that's not necessarily an aversion to technology. It's adopting a technology that really people feel comfortable using, and so they use it with its idiosyncrasies. Now, I think that a lot of people just want to use the tools that are there. The question is how you can put good tools in their hands to make it easy for everyone to do our job without having to spend a lot of time and money on the peripherals.